Yeehaw, partner. Welcome back to our wild ride through Old West history. Today, we're saddling up and riding shotgun with one of the most enigmatic figures to ever draw a six-shooter, the notorious Johnny Ringo. In a time when the Wild West was a lawless frontier, Johnny Ringo stood out not only for his deadly accuracy with a revolver, but also for his intriguing and mysterious life. Get ready to delve into the untamed tales and the fascinating lore surrounding the man who has been hailed as the most interesting Old West outlaw. So holster your imagination, because we're about to journey back to the days of dust and gun smoke, where legends were born. John Peters Ringo, better known as Johnny Ringo, was an Old West outlaw who fought in the Mason County War in Texas before moving to Tombstone, Arizona, and joining the Clanton Gang. Ringo, son of Martin and Mary Peters Ringo, had distant Dutch ancestry and was born in what later became the small town of Greens Fork, Indiana. In 1856, the Ringo family relocated to Liberty, Missouri. Interestingly, Johnny had a familial connection to the younger brothers. His aunt, Augusta Peters Inskip, wed Coleman P. Younger, the uncle of these notorious outlaws. In 1858, his family moved from Liberty to Gallatin, where they rented property from the father of John W. Sheets, who became the first official victim of the James Younger Gang when they robbed the Daviess County Savings and A&P Loan Association in 1869. A sad event occurred on July 30th, 1864, when Johnny was just 14 years old. His family was in Wyoming en route to California. His father, Martin Ringo, was killed when he stepped off their wagon holding a shotgun, which accidentally discharged. The buckshot entered the right side of his face and exited the top of his head. The family buried Martin on a hillside alongside the trail. Mason County War. Ringo left his mother, brother, and sisters in San Jose, California in 1869 and made his way to Mason County, Texas. There, he struck up a friendship with Scott Cooley, a former Texas Ranger who was the adopted son of rancher Tim Williamson. Trouble started when two American rustlers, Elijah and Pete Backus, were dragged from the Mason jail and lynched by a predominantly German mob. Full-blown war began on May 13, 1875, when a hostile posse arrested Tim Williamson, only for him to meet his tragic end at the hands of a German farmer named Peter "Badman" Bader. Cooley and his friends, including Johnny Ringo, conducted a terror campaign against their rivals. Officials called it the Mason County War. Locally, it was called the Hoodoo War. After the death of Cooley supporter Moses Baird, Ringo killed James Cheney on September 25, 1875, with a friend named Bill Williams. They rode up to Cheney's house. The unsuspecting Cheney, who had led Baird into an ambush, greeted Ringo and Williams unarmed, inviting them into his home. As Cheney washed his face on the porch, both Ringo and Williams shot him. The two then rode to the house of Dave Dool and called him outside, but he came out with a gun, causing them to flee back into town. Later on, Scott Cooley and Johnny Ringo mistakenly identified Charlie Bader as his brother Pete and took his life. Both men were jailed in Burnett, Texas by Sheriff Strickland, but Ringo and Cooley soon broke out of jail with help of their friends, and they parted company to evade the law. The Mason County War ultimately concluded around November 1876, resulting in the deaths of approximately a dozen individuals. Scott Cooley was thought to be dead, and Johnny Ringo and his friend George Gladden were in jail. One of Ringo's alleged cellmates was the notorious outlaw John Wesley Hardin. While Gladden received a 99-year sentence, Ringo seems to have been acquitted. 2 years later, Ringo settled in Loyal Valley, Texas, where he did a short stint as a constable. However, his life as a lawman didn't last long, as he next appeared in Arizona in 1879. Life in Tombstone, Arizona. Ringo first appeared in Cochise County, Arizona Territory in 1879 with Joseph Graves Olney, alias Joe Hill, a friend from the Mason County War. In December 1879, A drunk Ringo shot unarmed Louis Hancock in a Safford, Arizona saloon when Hancock refused a complimentary drink of whiskey, stating that he preferred beer. Fortunately, Hancock survived the shooting. Upon his arrival in Tombstone, Arizona, Ringo crossed paths with Sam Purdy, the editor of the Tombstone Epitaph, who later writes of their talk. He said that he was as certain of being killed as he was of living then. He said that he might run along for a couple years more and may not last 2 days. He was occasionally erroneously referred to as Ringold by local newspapers. In Tombstone, Ringo developed a reputation as having a bad temper. He may have been involved in various criminal activities, including robberies and killings, alongside the loosely affiliated group of outlaws known as the Cochise County Cowboys. In the 1882 Cochise County Great Register, Ringo described himself as a speculator. Though he was a known antagonist of Wyatt Earp, heavily involved with the Clantons, he was not a participant in the gunfight at the OK Corral. Confrontation with Doc Holliday. On January 17, 1882, Ringo and Doc Holliday traded threats and seemed headed for a gunfight. Tombstone's chief of police, James Flynn, intervened, arresting both men for carrying weapons within town limits. They were subsequently fined for their actions. Additional legal troubles awaited Ringo. Judge William H. Stilwell followed up on charges outstanding against Ringo for a robbery in Galeyville, resulting in Ringo's rearrest and jailed on January 20th for the weekend. Ringo was suspected by the Earps of taking part in the December 28, 1881, ambush of Virgil Earp that crippled him for life. Furthermore, Ringo was implicated in the March 18, 1882, murder of Morgan Earp, who was shot while playing pool in a Tombstone saloon. Joins posse pursuing Earps. Following the fatal shooting of Frank Stilwell in Tucson on March 20, 1882, Deputy U.S. Marshal Wyatt Earp and his posse embarked on a quest for vengeance. They were determined to hunt down and eliminate those they believed were responsible for ambushing Virgil and Morgan Earp. Cochise County Sheriff Johnny Behan received warrants from a Tucson judge for arrest of the Earps and Holliday. He deputized Ringo and 19 other men, many of them friends of Stilwell and the Cochise County Cowboys. During the Earp vendetta ride, Wyatt Earp killed one of Ringo's closest friends, Curly Bill Brocious, in a gunfight at Iron Springs, later Mescal Springs, about 20 miles from Tombstone. Earp later told his biographer, Stuart Lake, that a man named Florentino Cruz confessed to being the lookout at Morgan's murder and identified Ringo, Stilwell, Swilling, and Brocious as Morgan's killers, though modern researchers doubt Earp's story. The local posse pursued and came close to the federal posse at Henry C. Hooker's ranch. However, they never engaged in direct confrontation with the Earp lawmen. Bob Paul, a former Pima County sheriff who had been in Tombstone at the time and volunteered to ride with Behan's posse, wrote a letter to the Tucson Citizen on March 3, 1898, in response to an earlier story he said was full of errors. He said the Earp posse had told Hooker to tell Behan and his posse where they were camped. Hooker told Behan where the Earps were camped, but the posse left in the opposite direction. Mysterious death. During Tombstone's 4th of July festivities, Ringo drank heavily. He left town 2 days later, taking several bottles of liquor for the ride. Deputy Billy Breckenridge saw him 2 days later near Dials Ranch in the South Pass of the Dragoon Mountains. He later wrote that Ringo was very drunk, reeling in the saddle. Breckenridge encouraged Ringo to follow him back to the Goodrich Ranch, but he was drunk and stubborn and went on his way. I think this was the last time he was seen alive. At about 3 p.m. on July 13th, ranch hands at a nearby ranch heard a shot. It was not until July 14th that teamster James Yost was hauling wood when he found Ringo's body seated in a bunch of 5 large blackjack oaks growing up in a semicircle from one root, and in the center of them was a large flat rock which made a comfortable seat. Ringo's location was approximately 700 feet from Smith's house in West Turkey Creek Valley, near Chiricahua Peak in Arizona Territory. His body had already turned black due to the scorching desert heat, and his feet were wrapped in strips of cloth torn from his undershirt. The coroner's report detailed a bullet hole in Ringo's right temple, with an exit wound at the back of his head. The fatal wound was upward at a 45-degree angle between the right eye and ear. His revolver was still in his right hand. Ringo's Colt single action Army .45 revolver held 5 cartridges. The hammer rested on the empty chamber. A knife cut was found at the base of his scalp, as if someone had cut it with a knife. His horse was found 11 days later about 2 miles away with Ringo's boots still tied to the saddle. Following a coroner's inquest, his death was officially ruled as suicide. Ringo is buried a few yards from the tree where his body was found. On private property, the grave is located on a ranch southeast of Willcox, Arizona, and can only be viewed with permission. Despite the coroner's ruling and contemporaneous newspaper reports that Ringo had frequently threatened to commit suicide, and that the event was expected at any time, alternative theories of doubtful plausibility about Ringo's death have been proposed over the years. Some assert that the lack of a powder burns on his head suggests he was shot from a distance. The coroner's jury report does not mention the presence or absence of powder burns. Furthermore, Ringo's body was already turning black due to decomposition. Robert Bowler, a member of the coroner's jury, wrote in 1934, "I showed James Yost where the bullet had entered the tree on the left side. There was an empty shell in the 6-shooter, and the hammer was on that. I called it a suicide 52 years ago. I am still calling it suicide. I guess I'm the last of the coroner's jury." Wyatt Her Claims. According to the book I Married Wyatt Earp, which author and collector Glenn Boyer claimed to have assembled from manuscripts written by Earp's third wife, Josephine Marcus Earp, Earp and Doc Holliday returned to Arizona with some friends in early July. They encountered Johnny Ringo camped in West Turkey Creek Valley. When Ringo attempted to flee up the canyon, Earp shot him with a rifle. Nevertheless, Boyer's refusal to produce the source manuscripts, along with conflicting and unconvincing explanations, raised doubts about the veracity of the story. Alan Barra, a contributor to the New York Times, asserted that I Married Wyatt Earp is now widely regarded as a hoax by Earp researchers. Despite the skepticism surrounding Boyer's account, some, like Tombstone historian Ben T. Trawick, thought the story about Earp's involvement was credible, reasoning that only Earp had sufficient motive. He was probably in the area at the time, and near the end of his life he told one historian in circumstantial detail how he killed John Ringo. Indeed, Earp was interviewed in 1888 by an agent of California historian Hubert H. Bancroft, and in 1932, Frank Lockwood, who authored Pioneer Days in Arizona, wrote that Earp told both of them that he killed Ringo as he left Arizona in March 1882, almost 4 months before Ringo died. However, Earp included other details that do not match what is known about Ringo's death. Earp repeated his story to at least 3 other people. Interestingly, in an 1896 interview with a Denver reporter, Earp denied his involvement in Ringo's killing, but later privately claimed once again that he had. Doc Holliday story. The Holliday theory, much like the Earp theory, posits that Doc Holliday is the one responsible for Johnny Ringo's demise. Another variant, popularized in the movie Tombstone, suggests that Holliday stepped in for Earp in response to a gunfight challenge from Ringo and shot him. However, a closer examination of historical records reveals some discrepancies. Records from the Pueblo County, Colorado District Court indicate that Holliday and his lawmen made court appearances on July 11, 14, and 18, 1882 to answer charges of larceny. It's worth noting that a writ of capias was issued for Holliday on July 11th, suggesting that he did not in fact appear in court on that date. Ringo's body was found on the 14th. 6 days before Ringo's death, the Pueblo Daily Chieftain reported that Holliday was in Salida, Colorado, about 670 miles from Turkey Creek, Arizona, and then in Leadville, about 700 miles distant, on July 18th. Moreover, an arrest warrant still loomed over Holliday in Arizona for his alleged involvement in the murder of Frank Stillwell. Given these circumstances, it becomes unlikely that Holliday would have ventured into Arizona during that period. Michael O'Rourke theory. Some accounts attribute Ringo's death to Michael O'Rourke, an itinerant gambler who was arrested in Tucson in January 1881. Wyatt Earp is said to have protected him from being lynched by a mob organized and led by Ringo. O'Rourke escaped from jail in April 1881 and never stood trial on the murder charges. The last documented sighting of O'Rourke was in the Dragoon Mountains near Tombstone during May 1881, presumably on his way out of the territory. From then on, he is referred to only in unsubstantiated rumors and legends. According to some historians, a combination of the debt he owed Earp and the grudge he held against Ringo prompted him to return to Arizona in 1882, track Ringo down. While some sources consider the story plausible, others point out that O'Rourke, like Holliday, would have been reluctant to re-enter Arizona with a murder warrant hanging over his head, particularly to commit another murder. Frank Leslie story. While in the Yuma Territorial Prison, Buckskin Frank Leslie reputedly confessed to a guard that he had killed Ringo. Few believed his story, and some thought he was simply claiming credit for it to curry favor with Earp's inner circle, or for whatever notoriety it might bring him. Truth. Perhaps it was a case of suicide, or perhaps it wasn't. Unless and until more reliable information is obtained, the exact fate of Johnny Ringo remains a mystery because we simply don't have enough reliable information to definitively resolve this matter.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.